Distinguished guests, please welcome to the stage President and CEO of APAICS, Madalene Mielke.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you had an enjoyable first day with us yesterday. It's my pleasure to welcome you to day 2 of the Legislative Leadership Summit. I'm Madalene Mielke, President and CEO of APAICS, and we are very excited to host you on this second day. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Amazon and Johnson & Johnson. We really appreciate all of the support that they have in our partnership. You can also find more information on them as well in our other partners in our guidebook app. So if you have not yet downloaded the app, you can see that on the screens on the QR codes. Or the virtual program is also there, so you can find more information on the speakers and the summit schedule. We would also like to thank all of our special guest speakers, panelists, and moderators for today. All of this support really continues the work that we do in bringing representation and participation at all levels of the political process, from community service to elected leaders to the ANHPI community. Next, I'd like to introduce a welcome video from our honorary co-chair, Congresswoman Doris Matsui, who also serves as a KPAC Executive Board member. She represents California's 7th Congressional District and serves as a senior member on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. So if I can please direct your attention to the screen.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to join you for this year's APAICS Legislative Leadership Summit. I'm honored to serve as a co-chair of this year's events, alongside my friend and colleague, Congresswoman Jayapal. As we celebrate the 30th anniversary of APAICS, we are also celebrating Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This month gives all Americans a special time to celebrate the immense impact that the AANHPI community has had on the American cultural fabric. It gives us an opportunity to reflect upon our community's leaders who have shaped history and pave the way for all of us. The challenges we face as a collective are diverse and complex. Time and time again, we have shown our ability to overcome, adapt, and display our incredible resilience. That is what makes events like these vitally important. They give us an opportunity to think bigger, learn from each other, and have important discussions to uplift the issues that matter most to our community. In the 30 years that APAICS has served the AANHPI community, they have been instrumental in moving our priorities forward. For all of us to succeed, we must ensure everyone has a seat at the table in real and substantive ways. That's why I worked hard my entire career to make sure that's the case. More than 20 years ago, I worked in the White House and helped President Bill Clinton establish the White House Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. This initiative has increased the participation of the AANHPI community in federal programs with culturally competent and intentional outreach. APAICS, along with the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, of which I'm a proud member, continue to support this initiative and its reauthorization in every presidential administration. Those of you here know very well that the AANHPI community is a vastly diverse group within itself. We come from many different ethnic backgrounds with rich cultural traditions. That means we oftentimes come up against overgeneralizations and stereotypes. And that makes incorporating all of our diverse voices all the more important. You know, my story is unique, but we all have those unique American stories. How we got here, our families, and our dreams. linking together my role as a policymaker and proud Japanese American, I've authored legislation to ensure that the Japanese American story is not lost in time. The Norman Y. Mineta Japanese American Confinement Education Act lifts the voices of our past and teaches our younger generations about the injustice and perseverance that has been woven into the Japanese American identity. The fact of the matter is that we all have the power to uplift our stories and inform our fellow Americans about our amazing tapestry of cultures. This summit allows us to make important connections and start those broader community conversations. Please make the most of this summit. And thanks again to APAICS and to all of you for the important work that you do. Thank you.
As Congresswoman Matsui mentioned, we were very honored to have Congresswoman Jayapal as our other honorary co-chair for the Legislative Summit. She is also a KPAC Executive Board member, and we are honored that she was able to submit a video for her welcome remarks. She represents Washington's 7th Congressional District and is the first woman of South Asian descent to be elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. She's also one of only 24 naturalized citizens currently serving in the U.S. Congress. She also serves on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Education and the Workforce Committee. Please direct your attention to the screen for a short welcome video.
I'm Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, and I'm honored to represent Washington's 7th Congressional District in the House of Representatives, where I also serve as the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I want to start by thanking APAICS for inviting me to take part in your 2024 Legislative Leadership Summit. I am so proud to be an honorary co-chair along with my good friend and colleague, Representative Doris Matsui, for this incredibly important event that brings together AA-NHPI leaders from across the country. And I'm so grateful to those who lead APAICS and everyone else that is here today who works to support our collective vision and movement. This year's theme, Our Community, Our Leaders, Our Legacy, recognizes the accomplishments of the AA-NHPI trailblazers who have come before us, the impact of those pushing tirelessly for change today, and the promise of the leaders that we'll meet in the future. Our community's voice is not only critical to national discussions on issues, but we are also some of the top change makers leading the effort to build a more fair, equitable, and representative society. But breaking into this space is not easy. It takes so much work, and so many before us have paved the way for our generation to become leaders and influential policymakers. As the first South Asian American woman to ever be elected to the House of Representatives, I know how important representation is, and that is why I have fought so hard for AA-NHPI communities during my time here in Congress. That's why I've introduced my South Asian Heart Health Awareness and Research Act, legislation to both raise awareness about the alarming rate of heart disease for South Asians in the United States, and also to put resources toward reversing this trend. I've also fought to put more effort toward data disaggregation in medical research. We have to provide grants and resources for data on AA-NHPIs to be broken down into further subgroups, rather than just combining all AA-NHPI health data into one large group. Not every person from the AA-NHPI community is the same, and not every one of us has the same health needs. Without disaggregation, critical research findings are often hidden in larger data trends, hampering drug development and treatment. Additionally, I've partnered with the Biden-Harris administration to lift up AA-NHPI voices. We've taken strong steps to fight back against Asian hate, expand language access across federal programs, increase diversity in the federal workforce, and invest in our communities. And just last year, the administration released its first ever national strategy to advance equity, justice, and opportunity for AA and HPI communities. That's an enormous step toward making sure our voices are heard in the rooms where the decisions are made. This is all incredibly important progress, but we still have a lot more to do. From unequal pay to discrimination in our schools and workplaces, I will continue fighting in Congress until we achieve full equality for every single member of the AA and HPI community. This is a whole of community effort, and you all play such a vital role in pushing the envelope and achieving real policy changes. With your help, we will keep making progress, and as we do, please remember that I will be fighting right alongside you in the halls of Congress every step of the way. Thank you, and have a wonderful, safe, and productive summit.
Distinguished guests, please welcome Vice President of Development and External Affairs, Tanya Layden.
Hi, everyone, and thank you to Representative Jayapal for those remarks. My name is Tanya Layden, and I am the Vice President for Development and External Affairs at APAICS. It is now my pleasure to introduce Lan Pham from State Farm to deliver additional opening remarks. Lan is State Farm's operations manager, where she has leadership oversight and accountability for the underwriting and service of State Farm's auto line of business. Please join me in welcoming Lan Pham to the stage.
Thank you so much for that, Tanya. Well, good morning. My name is Lan Pham. I am an operations manager for State Farm, P&C Underwriting Department based in Charlottesville, Virginia. On behalf of over 19,000 agents and more than 65,000 employees, I bring you greetings. We are pleased to support the 2024 Legislative Leadership Summit and privileged to be a partner with APAICS as they provide a forum to convene subject matter experts, AA and NHPI elected officials, community and corporate leaders, and key stakeholders to have bipartisan policy discussions on a variety of issues affecting our community and really the entire nation. I want to commend the CEO and President, Madalene, Mielke, and all her staff and of APAICS for their planning of this incredible leadership summit. This year, I absolutely love the theme, our community, our leaders, our legacy. At State Farm, we understand the importance of maintaining thriving and vibrant communities, investing in development of leaders, and building a legacy. We strive to make communities where we work and live better. In doing this, we look to partner with organizations like APAICS that share our vision and commitment to building stronger, better educated, and empowered communities. We proudly support specific programs at APAICS that develop stronger neighborhoods, drive career success, and develop leaders. Since our company's beginning, next month we actually will celebrate 102 years. At State Farm, we personify the good neighbor philosophy. Our legacy is not only built on our financial strength and competitive products, but also our core values of quality service, quality relationships, and integrity. We are dedicated to being a good neighbor and making a positive impact in our communities. For over 100 years, we've made it our mission to help people recover from the unexpected, help rebuild neighborhoods, invest in communities, economic development, and education initiatives. That's what being a good neighbor is all about. And we hope that you see from State Farm is a company who invests in and who cares about the communities where we live and work. But more importantly is there when you need us most. Once again, I would like to applaud APAICS for this amazing summit, packed with outstanding sessions and panelists. It is my hope that you will take away a key learning, something that you will do differently that will help make your communities stronger. This is how we will become better. Thank you so much for the invitation to take part in this leadership summit, and please enjoy day 2 of this summit. Thank you.
Thank you to Lan for welcome remarks. Our first panel of the day, The Balance of Infrastructure and Protecting Our Heritage, addresses how AA and NHPI communities can find a greater voice in the modernization and rezoning of our neighborhoods in efforts to improve our infrastructure. It's my honor to introduce our moderator, Nyla Boodoo. Nyla is the host of Axios' One Big Thing, a weekly podcast focused on business, politics, and culture. Nyla has been a journalist for more than 20 years for the Associated Press, Reuters, WBEZ Chicago Public Media, and her hometown paper, the Miami Herald. Let's welcome Nyla and our panelists to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. This is so great to see everyone right and ready to talk about infrastructure, which actually is really important, right? I think it's not necessarily the sexiest topic, but as we're thinking about our communities, our leaders, and our legacy, we know that unfortunately, in the past, infrastructure has been a way to destroy that. And so what we are here today to talk about with this wonderful panel is how we can do that better, how we are doing that better, and how we should be thinking about that going forward. There are full bios in the program, but I just wanted to start by introducing our panel. We have Representative Trish LaChica, who represents Hawaii in the House of Representatives, District 37. Davy Kim is a longtime transportation executive with WSP USA, and Annie Chung is president and CEO of Self-Help for the Elderly. Thank you for being here with me this morning. So I wonder if we can start by setting the stage, and Davy, I'm hoping you can help us do this, because as I said, when we think about infrastructure, it's actually in many ways historically been quite harmful to communities of color and our community in particular. So as we're talking about this, I just hope you can you help us provide just a perspective and set the stage for us on historically what we have contended with and how that affects the future?
Sure thing. Good morning. And Nyla, I would just start by saying infrastructure is sexy.
Okay.
It's very sexy and alluring. And so anyways, we'll get to that later. But to set the stage and give you some context, you're right, Nyla. If you look at the history of transportation infrastructure in the United States, it is a rather ugly history. If you think about the development of the interstate highway system and other forms of transportation that started many decades ago, communities of color, including AA and HPI communities, were displaced, disrupted, destroyed, all over the country. And but now, thanks to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, there are brand new competitive grant programs that are designed to change all of that and right wrongs of the past. And so I just want to highlight a couple of examples. First of all, anyone here from Philadelphia? A few? None? Anyways, okay. So right up the road, Chinatown in Philadelphia has been harmed for decades by the Vine Street Expressway, which divides two halves of Chinatown. Well, they just received a huge grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation, a $159 million grant to do what the community wants, and that is essentially to build a cap over the Vine Street Expressway. And it's more than an expressway, it's an interstate highway. Build a cap, create a park, open space, green space, bike facilities, and it's going to completely transform that neighborhood. It will lead to safer outcomes, more pedestrian friendly. And the beauty of this project is that this is exactly what the community wanted. And just to take a step back further, in the 1960s, when the Vine Street Expressway was proposed, Chinatown activists strongly opposed that project. Their efforts led to a downsizing of the project. Yes, it did go forward, but they did have some impact. But it still divided the community. So this is going to be a great addition to Chinatown. And US DOT just yesterday released a short-form documentary. It's about 5 minutes long. I wish you could all see it, but check it out on the DOT website. That really traces the history of this project. They interview the godmother of Chinatown in Philadelphia, Cecilia Moy Yep, and as well as other activists. It's a wonderful documentary, and it's a perfect example of the kinds of things the infrastructure law is designed to correct. Just another quick example, California High-Speed Rail Authority received a grant to renovate an historic train depot in Fresno. And you might think, well, what does that have to do with AA and HPI communities? Well, this train depot is right next door to Chinatown in Fresno. This is a rather underinvested and neglected part of downtown Fresno. The project will not only restore the train depot, but it will add tree canopies, park space, public gathering places, plazas. This will really do wonders for Chinatown in Fresno. And again, another example of the kinds of things the infrastructure law is designed to address. And so the bottom line, when you look at the infrastructure law, it is doing a huge job in terms of correcting injustices of the past. It'll take a few years before we see the results. That's just the reality of infrastructure, but it's exciting. And this is exactly what we need to redress things that have occurred in the past.
Representative LaChica, I know we're going to get into other aspects of infrastructure, particularly in regards to Hawaii, when we think about things like the Digital Equity Act. But first, I just want to ask you about your perspective and what you think in terms of Native Hawaiian voices in this conversation and what that looks like now.
Yeah, so, Hawaii, such a unique place, our geographical isolation being in the middle of the Pacific, and being the only island state. For us, really, if you look at our infrastructure, it's really over time evolved from the ancient times when in the 1500s we have what was called alaloa, or like the trails that would encircle the entire island, and then it kind of expanded and evolved when we had in the 1800s our plantation workers. We had immigrants from China, Japan, and the Philippines, and I'm also a proud Filipino American, to work in our sugarcane plantations and our pineapple fields. And because of this, we've seen how our population centers moved into these economic centers. And then finally, with the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom and the annexation of Hawaii to become a U.S. territory, there's always this sense of, and long-rooted in Hawaii's history, this sense of injustice. However, because also of our geographic isolation, Hawaii's just experienced a lot of natural disasters, and one, most recent example, which we've been through, the 2018 lava flows when the Kilauea volcano erupted and tore through a town in South Puna in Hawaii Island. We've had tsunamis, we've had hurricanes, but nobody really expected Hawaii to experience the devastation brought by the Lahaina fires. This was August of last year, and it devastated and decimated an entire town in a matter of hours. And despite all this tragedy, something that really strengthens Hawaii's people is really our sense of resiliency, right? And our sense of, it's really you hear this a lot, right? Because the spirit of aloha is just beyond like a reciprocal greeting. It really is a way of life. And in Hawaii, there's this Native Hawaiian proverb of, let me get this right, it's heva'a he moku he heva'a. So the canoe is an island, the island is a canoe. So what does that mean, right? And so when you're in a canoe, there's this heightened sense of awareness of the limited resources that you have. In a canoe, you kind of have a role to play. You're, as a paddler going towards a destination, you have a responsibility not just for your entire crew, but also to each other, so that everybody can move, with best place forward. And so, you see this example, in the wake of such disasters like Lahaina, where the community just comes together, but also in other examples where we've actually had really the power of people, people power in terms of the peaceful protests to halt construction crews going up Mauna Kea and the Big Island. We had the activists of the Native Hawaiian community and on our Red Hill crisis that really contaminated our water, our largest aquifer on Oahu. And so to me, it's really seeing this power of community voice, but I think the real challenge for us in government is how do we make sure that this transformational change doesn't just happen as a result of reacting to something. So how do we prevent things from happening? How do we enable our community and pass policies so that we're not just reacting to something, or not just reacting when something is being threatened.
Yeah, when you said community, I was thinking of canoe, I was thinking about balance, right? And that's such an important part of this. Annie, as we think about San Francisco in particular, I'm just curious about what role you see historic preservation and just the historic aspect, particularly of so much of the Chinatown community in San Francisco, how much that's being considered, how much a challenge that is to be preserving actual buildings.
I think that it's a very important subject matter to us. So Self-Help for the Elderly started back in 1966, so this is like our 58th year. And most of the elderly that we serve in the beginning, of self-help really are residents in Chinatown. So just give you a very brief recap of Chinatown. 30 square blocks, about 12,000 residents, densely populated. 900 businesses are there, and also over 100 what we call SRO buildings. These are single hotel rooms that are very substandard with no private bathroom and no private kitchens. So, of course, the lowest income immigrants, elderly families that just immigrated to the United States will all stay there. So to preserve Chinatown means keeping a lot of these old buildings. So what do we do to draw a balance, right? We can tear down these SROs because there's no other places to get people affordable housing. And because we're such a densely populated community, there's also lack of open space, also lack of technology. Because if you imagine getting broadband or getting the fiber network into old buildings that are not wired at all is truly, truly challenging. So Self-Help for the Elderly, along with other community-based organizations, have to rely on what we do best, and that is advocacy and community organizing. And that is to preserve the affordable housing while also seeking government grants, as Davey said, for infrastructure improvement work. So you can't tear down all these old, over 100 of these old SRO buildings. So how do you get internet into the buildings for the residents? You might have heard or read stories that our children have to go sit on the steps of the Chinatown Library and beg the librarian to keep the internet going at night so that they could finish their homework. that's not fair, right, for a large group of children that could not really do their homework or do their research like other kids. So in getting the digital divide gap, this big gap bridge, we have to work with carriers that are willing to go and wire up these old buildings, although the building owners, family association owners, and big landlords are not willing to spend the capital. So we have to also make sure that the community apply for federal, state, and local county money so that we really improve the internet accessibility. Without getting the internet, 99.9% of government grants now, all the public benefits program like CalFresh, Medicare, getting a job, applying for unemployment during the pandemic, all this you need the internet, you go online. So without it, the residents in Chinatown and a lot of the families and immigrants, just no way able for them to catch up. So this is a big role that the community-based advocacy group do, and we advocate for federal funding, for state money from Davey when he's transportation secretary. We will talk a little bit later about the central subway that finally was built after 40 years, and that would bring a lot of economic recovery, but more so access. Access is so important in many, many aspects. So on the digital divide front, self-help advocated, not just connecting the residents with the federal subsidy to get the $30 paid for the internet, but now the program ended, and we have to look for other ways, right, to find some extension or continuation of these very necessary programs. But we also get a lot of foundations to support us to buy devices like the Chromebooks, the iPads, the laptops. And over the last 4.5 years, we were able to give away over 1,000 devices to the lowest income immigrant seniors looking for jobs, also looking to build up their access to the internet. And that's very important because with the devices and working with carriers like Comcast and AT&T, we help the low-income residents to use the Internet Essential, the IE program, that let them pay only about $10 a month for the broadband. And this is important because we have to teach. During the pandemic, it's so important to recognize that a lot of people couldn't get access to food, get access to services because everything was shut down. But during that time, the opportunity also opened up, and then we held a lot of sessions to teach them how to get on Zoom, how to get back to see their doctors through telehealth, and all these virtual classes. So we were very happy that we were able to do that.
Annie, thanks for bringing up the internet and the idea of the digital divide. Representative LaChica, before I have you weigh in, Davey, because I know Hawaii has done some historic work on this. Davey, can you give us just a sense of the Infrastructure Act and what is available for digital infrastructure? And we think about particularly rural immigrant communities and how deep that divide is.
Sure thing. The Infrastructure Act, and I'm sure you've heard this and you've seen it in the media, you've heard terms like historic, unprecedented. It's all true. It's not an exaggeration because this is funding we've never seen before when it comes to infrastructure of all forms, including broadband, digital infrastructure, and of course, transportation infrastructure. There is so much funding available. It's amazing. We have Ricky Choi here, who's from LA County, and his agency has applied successfully for a lot of these grants. And so there is a lot, for sure. When it comes to broadband, I don't know all the details of how those programs work, but really it's an opportunity for local governments, state governments, and others to look into these grant programs, figure out what are their main selling points, and make the best case forward when it comes to applying, because these are competitive grants. You have to apply, and you may or may not get chosen. And so a lot of it depends on your overall state of readiness, what kind of non-federal resources you have for the project, so in other words, state and local funding, because these programs usually require a non-federal match. You've got to have some skin in the game, and you have to have a well thought out plan in order to qualify and be competitive in these programs. So there is so much in the IIJA, as it's called, for broadband and so many other areas.
So when we think about Hawaii, how Hawaii has a historic digital equity act, I think is an important part of that name as well.
Yeah, so when we think about infrastructure, we don't necessarily think about communication infrastructure, right? Digital infrastructure. And Davey is right. Hawaii received over $149 million as part of the Internet for All, infrastructure award under the administration, and is set to receive around $400 million. In Hawaii, we saw how we were all impacted by by digital inequity during the pandemic, when all of our schools shut down and students had to learn. So, the students that are the kids that were on the library steps, for us, it was people were driving to McDonald's and working on homework.
McDonald's parking
yeah, the
lot.
McDonald's story, right? That's very evident in Hawaii too. And, a lot of, for Hawaii, one of the things that I'm really excited about as part of our digital equity plan that was recently approved is that it's really about ensuring that all voices and are represented, and that community is represented. They're going to be launching what's called like a peer-to-peer support program. So what it is for our digital equity plan, the goal is to get 100% of Hawaii digital ready, or have all residential areas in Hawaii have access to high-speed internet.
And that's
huge.
That's the definition of digital ready.
Digital ready. Actually, the definition of digital ready is just beyond, because access is often already there in terms of our telecommunications companies. But if you really look at the missing legs of this piece, it's really people are not quite digital ready yet, right? They are not subscribing to the service because of affordability issues. They may not have devices. And more importantly, we have just sections in our community because, Hawaii is very diverse. We have limited English proficient, populations. 18% of our population of 1.5 million is foreign born. And people who don't even speak the language. And what it really is to be digital ready, what this amount of funding will help us do is not just to provide the device, to deploy the device and deploy the infrastructure, but it's also educating the aunties and the uncles in Hawaii on how to use it. And so equity for the digital equity plan is being defined as, one, how do we get people workforce ready? So how do they access the internet so that they can get job training, workforce readiness? They can basically, help do remote work at home. The second is really increasing our educational outcomes. So how do we get all kids access to online learning and from their own homes? And then the final piece is really healthcare access. And so during the pandemic, people couldn't be in the clinics. It was hard for them to even figure out what telehealth meant and how to download certain apps and how to write, being able to just talk to their doctor online. And so I'm really excited that this has, come to Hawaii. And certainly it's not just about, when you build it, doesn't necessarily mean that they'll come, right? It's intentional planning and intentionally going out to these communities, not just to provide the service, but also help them learn so that it's something that they can pass on to the next generation.
So before we get to audience questions, which we are going to get to, I wanted to ask you all about transportation, which is sort of transportation, infrastructure, also as we think about our elders, transportation that's culturally appropriate in terms of walkways or other areas. Davey, Annie, do you want to weigh in here on what you're seeing on this front? Go ahead, Annie.
For seniors, yes, safety is number one, because a lot of major cities have these Vision Zero plan, right, to end fatality by certain year. But unfortunately, in San Francisco, we never quite got there. We're always like in the middle of all of the major California cities. Over 30 people died every year on our streets. And recently, you must have heard about that family of 4 all perished in one accident. When the driver went to the wrong side of the road, hit a bus shelter, and the whole family of 4 died. It was really heartbreaking. So safety is number one. So for us, pedestrian safety starts with traffic lights. So in Chinatown, the community worked really hard and got 8 what we call scramble traffic lights. That means you could cross diagonally on the crisscross. And those 8 signal lights really saved a lot of lives, because in Chinatown there were a lot of accidents that involved pedestrians. But we also advocated for the Central Subway, which is a major infrastructure project. $1.9 billion, took 14 years to complete, but it is the only and first major north-south line in San Francisco that connected a lot of our minority communities from Bayview, where the African American community, Visitation Valley, south of Market, then all the way to Chinatown, where Asian and Pacific Islanders live. So it's very, very important, Central Subway. Although it took so long, a lot of the businesses and residents really complained like crazy during those 14 years, because it stopped everything, right? But when it opened, particularly last year, it just brought back a lot of small businesses, and people start to come to Chinatown. I think that we recovered kind of faster than other communities because of the Central Subway. So it's a very, very important transportation kind of remedy for our community.
I just want to say, when it comes to roadway safety and traffic safety, the United States is an outlier. There are more fatalities and serious injuries in the United States than just about anywhere in the world. And it's really complex, and it's confounding as well. And Annie touched upon a lot of it. They're vulnerable road users, that's the term of art, and that describes pedestrians and bicyclists and transit users. They're the ones who are losing their lives on the streets of San Francisco, Philadelphia, you name it. And it's become a public health crisis and epidemic. And so there's a real sense of urgency around road safety, traffic safety. We have a long way to go, but projects like Central Subway in San Francisco, Chinatown Stitch in Philadelphia will help improve safety, because it'll create a more welcoming environment, a more user-friendly, pedestrian-friendly environment that will reduce vehicular traffic in certain parts of the city and just make it safer to move around the city. And so that's really exciting. One other thing I just want to mention, Nyla, really quickly, everything we're talking about here fits into the framework of the Justice 40 initiative, which is part of the Biden-Harris administration. And that initiative says 40% of all federal resources must be spent in disadvantaged communities. And so everything we're talking about here fits into that framework, and it's going to meet that goal of 40%, which is really exciting.
That's a great segue into questions from the audience. I think we have a few minutes where we can take questions from folks. And yeah, I see someone over here. Just raise your hand high, because I only there we go. Okay, you're next.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much. My name is Dan Sakura. I'm a Hapa Yonsei, so 4th generation Japanese American, my dad's side. I'm also a descendant of 3 generations of survivors of Minidoka, which was a Japanese American World War II incarceration site in Idaho. And I'm currently advising the Minidoka Pilgrimage Planning Committee to protect the Minidoka National Historic Site, which was designated by President Clinton as a national monument in 2001. During World War II, the US government cited Japanese American and Alaska Native incarceration sites in very remote parts of the western United States. Because of the large number of people involved, they cited these camps near rail lines. And today, industry has a lot of electric transmission that follows the rail lines. And these remote areas in the western U.S. are now ground zero for renewable energy projects, including the proposed Lava Ridge wind project that would dishonor Japanese Americans, Alaska Natives. And I believe this falls into the area of infrastructure because it is part of transmission, but we are working very hard to protect our heritage in the face of this threat. Unfortunately, there were Japan towns in the West Coast, but Nihonmachi, but they've been essentially destroyed by the incarceration. In addition, there's a threat from the FAA is proposing to build an airport on Tule Lake in California. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be around and happy to.
Do you have a question?
My question is, how would you advise us to fight to protect our legacy, America's commemorative landscape, the investments that our community has made in preserving Japanese American sites, including on Hawaii, the Honolulu site? Thank you.
Thanks.
Dan, it's good to see you. This is one of those cross-cutting issues that involves so many different agencies and departments, whether it's the Department of Energy, National Park Service, DOT, of course, and so many others. And I've heard of all these issues. I've heard of the proposed airport at Tule Lake and, of course, Manzanar and other places, and preserving those sites. It's going to take a champion. It's going to require a champion to really advocate for the interests and needs of preserving these sites and balancing that with the need for more renewable energy and more infrastructure. It's a tricky one, but a champion is what's needed.
Representative Lachika, as we go to the next question, I think over there, I just wanted to ask you, I actually was just doing an event yesterday in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and was talking about how there's worries that renewable energy will be as extractive to local communities as oil and gas has been. And as we think about sort of the push for green energy, I'm just sort of curious your thoughts about, as we're thinking about how this can help empower communities.
Well, Hawaii led actually the nation in being the first to declare, zero carbon emissions by 2045. And so this is something that is always going to be prioritized by our legislature, by government. I think what it is one of the things that is the biggest challenge for us right now is affordable housing, and really how our zoning laws our restrictive zoning laws, in the sense that much of Hawaii's land, land is at a premium. The median cost of housing to own a home in Hawaii is, can you guys guess? It's $1.1 million.
That's the median.
Yeah, that's the median in Hawaii. So who has $220,000 for 20% down payment? Certainly not me, right? And so that's one of the things that is also eroding our communities, is this mass exodus of people living Hawaii for a more affordable life in the mainland. And our zoning laws is really meant to preserve agriculture and also preservation land. But we see parts of Oahu where, we're able to utilize what's zoned for agriculture now. Lands that are now can't be used for agriculture because our sugar cane and our plantation industries have long shut down. But we're using it now for solar and renewable energy. So solar energy, and we have battery storage, and it's one of the things that we have in my district because we're unable to develop in those lands. We have steep mountains, we have coastal erosion in our beaches, and part of what's unique to Hawaii is we don't really experience gentrification in the same way as mainland cities, in the sense that where there is ability to build, unfortunately what threatens is luxury development, high rises in the population centers. And that's why one thing that's really assisted us is our development of our rail, Honolulu's rail program. So how many of you are planning to visit Hawaii, maybe in this year or next year? Okay, I would invite all of you to ride our rail. It's called the Skyline. One, because it's the most scenic rail ride you'll ever experience in the nation, and also two, it's the most expensive rail project also in the world at $10 billion. But it's very, very expensive to develop in Hawaii because of our lack of infrastructure. But what the rail infrastructure project will help provide opportunity is to build, as Davey mentioned, along the rail line, and also connect what was ignored communities of like development, so that we can also move those population and work centers to another part of the island. I think there was a question over here. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Marilyn Cachola with APAPA, and Representative Lechika, I'm a Filipina from Hawaii as well, so it's great to see you up there, Hanaho. My question actually goes back to the renewable projects that are coming up. The green economy is going to drive large-scale infrastructure, and some of the things like hydrogen hubs and carbon removal processors, the really big ones, 5 stories. Who's the champion that is going to be paying attention to that and making sure that we're not disproportionately placing those types of extractive facilities in communities of color or poor communities? Is there a champion right now that's out ahead and speaking about that?
Well, I guess for us, it's going back to the community voice. So when we have, I guess, funding awards or infrastructure projects that are designed in a certain way that it doesn't really prioritize community voice. Like for example, right, you only have a 2-week window or a 30-day public comment period. It doesn't really work. And in Hawaii, I mean, we're just different in that we've really taken to heart a lot of our environmental advocacy, and that's kind of why we have these crazy expensive infrastructure projects, because it does contribute, because we want to do things right. It does take a long time. I mean, if you just look at H3, that freeway, the authorization of those funds came in when Hawaii became a state in the 1960s, but it wasn't really in the 90s, more than 30 years later. I'm talking about, again, one of the most beautiful freeway, which punches through the Ko'olau Mountains. You should go look through it. When my kids, who are still 7 and 4, we go through it, they really think they're going through Jurassic Park. But it does take a long time for us to do that. And I think you really have to have champions, in government, and in terms of like the permitting process that will not just acknowledge where cultural sites are, where the environment could be threatened, but really honor the timeline. And so we're not rushing through things. In Lahaina right now, that's something that the community is really pushing for. Is when, as we rebuild Lahaina, that we're not just thinking of going back to how it was once. It was once, but in the building for tourism. But how do we really build for community and for sustainability?
Let me pose that question to the two of you, Davey, Annie, especially Annie, as you've talked about the advocacy you've done. What's your advice to this room about how to become those champions?
I think ultimately, as I always said, elected officials, politicians, they come and they go. I'm sorry, representative, but the communities always stay there, right? Yeah. So community-based organizations really sometimes I call it the heart and soul. So you have to become champions in whatever cause you take up. Sorry, renewable energy is out of my league. But in terms of advocacy work, I remember, Davey, that when the Central Subway was first conceived in the late 1980s, our community advocate, Rose Pack, whose Central Station is named after, she told us that she would sit in these meetings year after year, month after month, when nothing literally happens, but she continuously say, do not leave out Chinatown. The Central Subway must include a stop, or else everybody will bypass our community and go from the south to the North Beach. So the Central Subway now stops at Chinatown, and that's where we bring back a lot of small business and residents and tourists. So I think that to become champions, you have to speak up, and you form alliances. So I talk about the digital divide, and our community between the chambers of commerce and the residents, tenants association, and the community advocacy group, we all advocated with the telecommunication carrier that they cannot redline, could not continue to redline low-income and minority and immigrant community. They must build the next, technology network so that our kids, our families, and our immigrants could look for jobs and everything. So we must speak up.
I'll simply say that Rose Pak was the epitome of a diehard, committed activist in San Francisco Chinatown. She was persistent. She was, nothing intimidated her, and she was always there, just as Annie said. Sometimes these meetings are really boring and they're dry and they get overly technical, but she was there, and she always made sure that decision makers knew that Chinatown was watching, and they were ready to raise hell if the interests of Chinatown were not adequately addressed. And so that's what we need in every local community. More Rose Paks, people like her who devote their lives to this and put the interests of the community first and make sure that elected officials and decision makers know that they are being watched and that they will be held accountable.
Let's do one quick question. There was back here, if we can do that quickly before we do final remarks.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to make a comment. John Chin with the Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation. I heard former State Secretary Kim mention this Chinatown Stitch. I just want to underscore something, that the infrastructure bill is the most significant bill that has come down the pike. The Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods grant is specific for communities of color that have been harmed by infrastructure projects. I just want to emphasize two things. One is these projects that we're trying to undo were placed in communities of color decades ago. So this falls under the environmental injustice that many of our communities have experienced. So even the traffic engineers in our state and city recognize those wrongs that happened in the 50s and 60s. That's number one. Secondly, I think more important is the organizing, and the David Kim mentioned we have to be ready. The organizing, the visioning, and engagement of our communities is really important. We started this Chinatown Stitch visioning in 2004. So 20 years later, we were primed and ready to apply for this grant. And so I think there's going to be a transformation for Philadelphia's Chinatown, but we all have to work at it, because the National Trust for Historic Preservation did a series of 15 Chinatowns across the country that are in danger of disappearing. So if we're going to preserve our communities, whether it's in Hawaii, San Francisco, New York, Philadelphia, we all have to really work and organize to figure out how to preserve and protect our communities.
That's a perfect segue to the last question. We just have a few minutes left, but I just wanted to end. We've talked about so many things today. The things you think of when you think of transportation, like pedestrian walkways and roads, but also digital infrastructure. We've touched a little bit on climate resiliency. I just wanted to end by asking, what other cultural things are we not thinking about when it comes to AA and HPI communities and infrastructure? Who wants to go first? We have 4 minutes.
We didn't talk a lot about transit, but the role of transit in developing local communities, economic development is huge. And, well, Annie mentioned it, Central Subway in San Francisco. That is a positive shot in the arm for Chinatown in San Francisco. Even if it was overdue, over budget, behind schedule, all of that, it's now working wonderfully. And I just want to mention, John, I'm so glad you brought it up, and Chinatown Stitch in Philadelphia. And I think you illustrated for the group here how painstaking and how difficult, and it was a very long journey, and now you're at the stage many years later where you have a grant, and this will become a reality. And I did see that documentary, and I think you were in there, so everyone should watch that documentary, because John, in addition to Cecilia, was one of the persons interviewed, and you provided that history. Again, it's a wonderful documentary. You should all check it out. It's only 5 minutes. And I think the Stitch project in Philadelphia really exemplifies how long this takes and how it requires a dedicated group of committed individuals like John, like Cecilia, and you just have to stay with it. and have a voice and hold elected officials accountable. And they've done that. And so we'll see the fruits of their labor a few years from now.
I think for me, to contribute to that is really, as I think about the immigrant communities, and when you look really culturally, I was an immigrant. These are communities that culturally we don't want to draw attention to ourselves. We just want to move along, just put our head down, not draw attention to ourselves, not be in the spotlight. We also are, we don't want to question authority. We don't want to ask for help. And organizing, I know we say this a lot, and advocacy, but it's very, very hard to do. Intentionally, it's very, very difficult to do, because you're going to want to reach communities that don't want to be a part of, and because they've never been part of these conversations. And so it takes extra effort, because, these are people who don't even typically have 9-to-5 jobs. They don't even have access to transportation. They are in very rural communities. They don't speak the language, and they don't even have internet. And this is the case in some of our communities in Hawaii. And so I think for my role as a policymaker, and Annie, I'm still in my first term, so hopefully I get to stay a little bit. But what has worked for me is, and maybe it's because of my background, I was born and raised in the Philippines, and I was a journalist, but it's really the intention of being invited to these spaces. So when people say, invite me to visit this and really experience it and take this commute and see how difficult it is to get from point A to point B. And so there's nothing quite like just being a part of that community and just keep pushing. Like, Davey said, it's like, don't ever keep pushing. If you don't get to pass it this year, there's always next year to pass important legislation into law. But in closing, it's really, you have to think about it, you're not doing it for your current organization or for your current community, but going back again to that canoe, it's what are we passing on to our next generation so that they don't have to inherit, all the problems that we're currently experiencing and facing. And so what are we doing now? Because if not you, right, then who? What are we leaving, and what will the next generation inherit?
For me, to understand our culture needs language. So I would advocate for language access ordinances and policies that make sure that everything the federal government does or want to inform or want the community to participate must be provided in multilingual and multicultural format so that everybody could participate.
That's a great point. Well, thank you so much, Annie, Davey, Representative Lechika, for talking about this today.